Every December, in the frozen town of Glenriver, children would wait on the steps of the old library, their breath turning to mist as they clutched letters in mittened hands. Not for the librarian, not even for a storybook. They came for the man in red, not the mall Santa with bright lights and fake beards. This one never asked for payment, never let anyone take photos, and never once revealed his face beneath the thick beard and hat. Yet, year after year, he returned like clockwork. With a sleigh built from salvaged wood, filled with handmade toys and secondhand books that somehow always fit each child perfectly. He never missed a name, never forgot a wish. His name was Thatcher Wells, but no one in Glenriver knew that. Not really, to them. He was just the quiet Santa, or that strange man who does Christmas behind closed doors. Some call him the loner, or whispered things like, didn't he get kicked out years ago? Because he had. In the fall of 1989 at 17, Thatcher was expelled from school and thrown out of his parents' home after someone found a love letter he'd written to another boy. A single sentence, written in blue ink on lined paper, had cost him his family, his future, and his name. For decades, Thatcher lived in silence. He moved through Glenriver like a shadow taking jobs no one else wanted, living in the attic of an abandoned post office, keeping his head down. But every winter, he gave. Not because he was forgiven, not because anyone apologized, but because he remembered what it felt like to believe in something, and because no one had done it for him. He remembered one winter in particular, cold beyond measure. He was sleeping in a shed, wrapping himself in newspapers. A child, barely 8, had walked by and offered him half a candy cane. No words, just kindness. That night, Thatcher made himself a promise. If the world was going to shut him out, he would build his own. One act of magic at a time. The town never asked questions. That was easier, better. As long as he didn't speak, didn't correct them, didn't make them uncomfortable. Thatcher was tolerated, a quaint tradition, a harmless ghost from the past. He liked it that way. Safety wasn't belonging, but it was close. But this year, something shifted. Among the piles of hand-drawn letters and sticky-fingered notes left in the mailbox at the library, one envelope stood out. It was pale green, folded 3 times, taped at the edges, addressed in shaky crayon to Santa. Inside was a short note written in block letters, the kind that looked both careful and scared. Dear Santa, my name is Evan. My dad says boys can't love boys, but I saw it on TV and it looked nice. If I say that, will I be on the naughty list? Thatcher's hands trembled. He had written almost the exact same thing at age 9. He'd slipped it under his father's Bible, thinking it would be found gently. Instead, it was returned in pieces, burned at the edges, the only response a belt across the back and weeks of silence. This letter, this child, was the echo of something buried deep in his chest. It wasn't just a question, it was a lifeline, reaching through snow and years and silence. Thatcher read it again and again. He didn't sleep that night. He watched the flames in his wood stove until sunrise. By morning, he had written a reply. No return address, no signature, just Santa, answering a child the way he should have been answered long ago. Dear Evan, you are not naughty. Boys can love boys, and Santa still puts them on the nice list. What Thatcher didn't know, what would only come to light later, was that this letter wasn't written by a child. It had been written for one, and that would change everything. For now, though, Thatcher folded his reply, sealed it with gold wax, and slipped it into the return pile. A quiet beginning to a storm he never saw coming. If this story touched something inside you, don't forget to follow and support Heart Stories, where forgotten voices find their way back to the world. On Christmas Eve, snow fell gently across Glenriver, laying a hush over rooftops and turning the streets into a watercolor of silence and white. Thatcher Wells stood in the back room of the library, fastening the wide black belt over his red coat with the same care he always did. The boots had been resoled 3 times. The jacket was patched beneath the arms. Yet when he stepped into the softly lit children's section of the library, his presence transformed the room. Children gasped. Parents smiled. A little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit and whispered, "Santa came." He never spoke much. A few nods, a low chuckle, perhaps a whispered "Merry Christmas." But this year, for the first time, he brought something new. A short story he'd written himself. A simple tale about two boys named James and Leo, best friends who secretly built gifts for the whole village and delivered them in the night. They weren't brothers. They weren't elves. They were simply kind. The only thing different about them was that, in the final page, they held hands. Some parents stiffened. One muttered something under their breath, but Thatcher kept reading, voice steady. One child giggled. Another leaned closer. No one left. And at the end, when he closed the handmade book, the room was silent, until a boy's voice spoke. "Was that about us?" It was Evan. He sat near the back, legs swinging above the floor, a candy cane stuck in his hoodie pocket. Next to him was a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a watchful gaze. Thatcher recognized her instantly. Mary Ann Harper. She'd grown up in Glenriver. Quiet girl, brilliant reader, raised in foster care after her parents died in a car crash when she was 12. He remembered giving her a book once when she couldn't afford to buy it, a copy of A Wrinkle in Time with a torn cover. She'd cried. He never forgot that. Now, her son was the boy who'd written the letter, or so he thought. After the reading, Evan approached, looking up at him with big eyes. "Did you get my letter?" he asked. Thatcher nodded. "I did." "You really think I'm not naughty?" He knelt, quietly adjusting the boy's scarf. "You're exactly what the world needs more of." Evan smiled, but Marianne's face was pale. She held her son's shoulder with one hand, eyes fixed on Thatcher like she wanted to speak but couldn't. The next morning, Thatcher woke to something he hadn't expected. His story reading had gone viral, not through video, but through a photo. A parent had snapped a moment just after the reading ended. When Evan had reached out to hug Santa, the image spread through Glenriver's local Facebook groups with the caption, "The Glenriver Santa promoting LGBTQ+ stories to kids." The debate was instant and merciless. Some praised it. "It's about time someone showed our kids that kindness doesn't need labels." Others raged. "This is indoctrination," one father wrote. "What next, drag queens reading nursery rhymes?" But the loudest voice came from a man who knew the town's heartbeat too well. Dylan Harper, Evan's father, stepped forward. A respected figure in Glenriver, Dylan was the head of the town's marketing council and a deacon at the local church. He had influence, a clean image, and a past carefully buried. On a live stream viewed thousands of times, he declared, "I will not allow my child to be manipulated by hidden agendas disguised as fairy tales. This Santa, whoever he is, has overstepped. Teaching children to question their identity at that age is a form of grooming. And let me be clear, it is not welcome in Glenriver." He never said Thatcher's name. He didn't have to. The town was small. People whispered. Others shouted. Within 48 hours, Thatcher was asked to step down from the annual library event, the same library where he'd repaired shelves, donated books, and delivered toys for 15 years. No warning, just an email. "We appreciate your service, but in light of recent controversy, we're changing direction for future events." That night, Thatcher sat in the attic of the old post office, surrounded by the toys he hadn't delivered. It wasn't the rejection that broke him. He had lived through worse. It was the realization that history had simply circled back, that even now, being kind wasn't enough if you were also different. But what he didn't know, as he packed away his red coat in silence, was that Marianne had something she couldn't hold in much longer. And the letter signed Evan wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. In the days that followed, Glenriver snow turned gray at the edges, mirroring the conversations in town. The library shelves stood still without their usual December bustle. Children asked where Santa had gone. Some parents avoided answering. Others replaced the story with easier ones. "He's moved. He's busy. He's not coming back." But in quiet corners, the story lingered. The photo of Evan hugging Santa had been shared and reshared, now blurred and watermarked by local blogs and news sites. No one knew the full name of the man in the suit, but speculations ran wild. Thatcher stayed silent. He didn't reply to messages. He didn't explain himself. He never did. Most people assumed that meant guilt, but it wasn't guilt he carried. It was a lifetime of knowing that even when he gave everything, it could still be taken apart by someone louder, someone angrier, someone more acceptable. What the town didn't know was this: Thatcher had funded nearly every Christmas event out of pocket. The toys, the storybooks, the cocoa for the library, the sled rides, none of it came from any city grant. For over a decade, he had quietly sold furniture he restored, artwork he painted under a pseudonym, and rare books he collected from donation bins. He kept receipts. He just never asked for thanks. But someone had started digging. The day before New Year's Eve, Dylan Harper released a formal complaint to the town council, alleging that Thatcher had used children's programming to spread ideology and questioning the sources of funding behind his Santa operation. He called for a financial audit, citing possible misappropriation of community trust. That word trust carried a weight it didn't deserve, and Thatcher, as always, took the hit without reply. That same night, under dim attic light in the smell of old pine wood, Thatcher heard a knock. He almost didn't answer, but when the second knock came, gentler, slower, he opened the door. It was Marianne. She didn't say hello. She held a small envelope, worn at the edges, and extended it toward him. "I wrote the letter," she said. Thatcher took a long breath but said nothing. "I used Evan's name," she continued, "because if I signed mine, I didn't think you'd answer. And so because it wasn't really for him. Not yet." He looked down at the envelope. It was pale green, crayon at the edges, but the handwriting wasn't a child's. Not if you looked closely. "I found Dylan's journal a few months ago. He wrote things I'd never read before. He said he used to feel things for boys, for his best friend, that he hated it, that his father hit him when he found out. And now, he sees our son watch something on TV or ask an innocent question, and he panics." She paused. "I didn't write the letter to expose him. I wrote it to save Evan from becoming another man who spends his life trying to hide a mirror." The words hung between them. Thatcher didn't cry, but something in him settled. The kind of silence that happens not from fear, but from being seen. Marianne looked at him for a long time. "I'm sorry for what they're doing to you. You didn't deserve it. You never did." He wanted to say thank you, but the words caught. So instead, he walked to the back of the room and pulled a box from the shelf. Inside was a single item, a photo. It showed a boy, no older than 9, sitting on the lap of Santa Claus. The setting was different in an old-school auditorium, years ago, but the boy was unmistakable. Dylan Harper. The photo had been taken during one of Thatcher's earliest appearances as Santa. Before the beard had gone gray, before people forgot his name, the photo had never been published. It had been kept, folded, in Thatcher's wallet for over 20 years. Not out of obsession, not out of revenge, but because, in that moment, the boy had smiled. Not out of performance, but joy, pure, untouched joy. Marianne stared. "He remembered that," she whispered. "He said Santa was the only adult who ever looked at him without judgment." Thatcher nodded once. He just forgot what that meant. Outside, snow was falling again. Marianne stood at the doorway and turned back before leaving. "You could leave this town, start somewhere else." "I tried," Thatcher said quietly, "but I kept coming back. Not for them, for the ones who ask questions, the ones who still believe someone will answer." She left, and he returned to the quiet. But that evening, as Thatcher sat beside his stove, the local paper released a new headline. Town Santa exposed decades of deception unfold. It showed the photo, the one with Dylan as a child. It had been leaked, likely by someone trying to shame them both. Instead, it did something else. By morning, the comments changed tone. People who'd never spoken out before began to write. I remember him giving my daughter her first book. He fixed my fence for free. He bought groceries for my mother when she was dying. The town had tried to erase a man, but now his history was speaking for itself. When the photo of Dylan Harper as a child sitting on Santa's lap resurfaced in the town paper, it was meant to shame. It was supposed to reinforce the narrative that something had always been off about Thatcher Wells, that he had connections to kids going back decades, that perhaps all this generosity had been something darker, something twisted. But Glenriver had a way of surprising itself, because the photo didn't stir fear, it stirred memory. People began to talk, quietly at first, in bakeries and barbershops, then louder, in church lobbies, in grocery store aisles. Stories floated back into the light, old, buried, but intact. A woman remembered Thatcher showing up with boxes of diapers after her husband left. A man recalled him repairing the roof of the VFW hall when the town wouldn't allocate funds. A teacher found a card in her drawer from a decade ago. For the books you gave when no one noticed my son liked to read. Bit by bit, the silence around Thatcher's name began to crack. Not everyone joined in. Some still clung to suspicion, to religion twisted into resentment, but something had changed. And Dylan Harper knew it. At first, he doubled down. He held emergency meetings at the church. He circulated a petition to protect the moral integrity of Glenriver's public spaces. But support was thinner than he expected. Fewer signatures, less applause. The pressure mounted not just publicly, but at home. Marianne had stopped attending events with him. She refused interviews. And at a PTA meeting, when asked about her husband's stance, she said only, "Our family is still figuring out how to heal." But the true unraveling began when an anonymous email arrived at the Glenriver Sentinel, signed only with the initials M.H. Attached was a scanned page from a personal journal, handwritten, undeniably authentic. I used to watch him in science class. His wrists were thinner than mine. He smiled at everything. One time, he touched my shoulder, and I couldn't sleep for 3 days. I prayed it away. I begged. I cried. But it stayed. The page was dated 1997, Dylan's high school year. The town went quiet again, but in a different way. Not from fear, from discomfort, from recognition, from a question that spread without being asked out loud. If someone spends their whole life hiding from love, what happens when they see someone else living it without shame? Meanwhile, Thatcher kept to himself. He didn't hold press conferences. He didn't correct rumors. But one day he returned to the library, not as Santa, not in costume, but as himself. He stood at the front desk and asked to check out a book. The librarian, a man in his 20s with pink hair and chipped nail polish, looked nervous. I'm not sure if I can, he began. Thatcher smiled gently. That's all right, I'll just leave this here. He slid a thin hardcover across the counter. It wasn't a return. It was a manuscript. The Boy Who Wasn't on the List, by Thatcher Wells. The book was short, 40 pages, bound by hand, illustrated in pencil. It told the story of a child who wrote letters every year to Santa, but never got an answer. Not because Santa didn't care, but because he had no address, no home. So the boy grew up thinking he was invisible, until one year he became Santa himself, not for gifts, but to answer the letters he never received. There was no marketing, no launch party, but within days, copies had been scanned and shared. Teachers printed it for classroom readings. Bookstores asked for reprints. One woman in town posted the final page, handwritten in looping script. You are not hard to love. They just never learned how to see you. By New Year's Day, the library board reversed its decision. They issued a statement acknowledging Thatcher's contributions. A few called it too little, too late. Others saw it for what it was, a small step toward correcting something long overlooked. That same week, the city council met in chambers colder than the streets outside. One by one, citizens approached the microphone during open forum. A teenager named Cole thanked Thatcher for making him feel normal. A mother of 3 said her daughter came out to her after reading his story. An old man broke down talking about the time Thatcher shoveled his driveway after surgery without saying a word. Then came the final speaker, Dylan Harper. He looked smaller than usual. His tie was crooked. His voice didn't carry like it used to. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I owe this town honesty." He paused, staring into the room. "I was a child once, who felt something he didn't understand. I grew into a man who tried to erase it in others, thinking it would erase it in me. I hurt people, including someone who did nothing but give." His voice cracked. "I used to think I was broken, but Thatcher never was. He just refused to lie." No one clapped. No one needed to. Some wounds don't close, but they stop bleeding when truth is finally spoken. Snow was melting in Glenriver when the letter arrived. It came not in December, but late January, long after the ornaments had been boxed away and the red bows stripped from doors. It was addressed, in uneven cursive, to Mr. Wells, and inside was a single line written in pencil. "Thank you for answering my question, even when it wasn't really mine." No name, no return address, but Thatcher knew who it was from. The town had quieted again, not in shame this time, but in a kind of collective reflection, like after a long storm, when windows are opened and everything smells of wet earth and something older, something honest. The rage had passed, the accusations faded, and in its place, something deeper settled in recognition. People stopped Thatcher on the street now, carefully, unsure of how to approach. Some just nodded, some apologized. Some asked for nothing more than to shake his hand. It felt foreign to him, being seen without the costume, without the padding of red and white and mystery, but not unwelcome. One afternoon, he returned to the library not as a figure to entertain, but as a guest of honor. A reading of The Boy Who Wasn't on the List had been organized by the local youth group, and the children, Evan among them, took turns reading its pages aloud. They didn't rush. They paused on the soft lines. They noticed things adults had missed. And when they reached the final page, Evan stood to read the words Thatcher had once written alone in an attic, never imagining anyone would hear them. "You are not hard to love. They just never learned how to see you." No one spoke when it ended, but the silence was full, not empty. Afterward, Evan walked up to Thatcher with a folded sheet of paper. "This time," he said, "it's really from me." The letter was simple, just a few lines, but every word was spelled right. "Dear Mr. Wells, my mom says you saved Christmas. I think you saved my dad too. I'm still learning about everything, but I hope I can be like you when I grow up. P.S. I hope I'm on the nice list." Thatcher folded the letter slowly, tucking it into the inside pocket of his coat. "You are," he whispered. "You always were." But perhaps the most unexpected moment came weeks later, when the local church, led by a quietly reformed Dylan Harper, invited Thatcher to speak at the community winter gathering. No sermons, no declarations, just one request. "Would you read your story one more time?" Thatcher hesitated, but then he stepped onto the small stage, lit by nothing more than string lights, and read each word as if it were a breath he'd been holding for decades. When he finished, a woman in the crowd stood and asked, "Why did you keep coming back here? After everything?" He didn't pause. "Because someone always writes," he said, "even if they think no one will answer." As the event ended, Marianne walked over and slipped a small object into his palm. A wax seal stamp, gold, with a single word engraved, "Seen." He held it for a long time. That spring, Thatcher reopened the old post office not as a shelter for himself, but as Glenriver's first community letterhouse. A place where children could write without fear, where teens could ask questions no adult had ever answered, where no letter was ignored, where belief wasn't punished, but preserved. The sign out front didn't say Santa, it simply read, "Someone is listening." And people came. Some wrote about loneliness, others about music, or being scared, or wanting to dance when no one was watching. Some asked if boys could wear pink, or if crying meant you were weak, or if it was okay to still miss someone who hurt you. Thatcher read every letter. He didn't fix lives, but he answered. kindly, consistently, quietly. He no longer needed a red suit to be magic. He only needed to be himself. And in a town that once tried to forget him, Thatcher Wells had become the man whose silence had changed everything. What would you write in your letter if you knew someone would really read it? Tell us in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, follow Heart Stories, where the ones left behind finally come home.